All right, hey, trying to be fancy. This is, come on, do the thing. Um, Hi, this is, that was Prairie Rose by Roxy Music from their 1974 album, Country Life. And this is the video of Counter Arguments. It is also episode 3 of Investigators of the Truth series, the third and final episode, and is also going to be an episode in the Persuasive Writing series, where I actually skipped over the paragraph episode to do this episode. So I think it's episode 5 of that, and paragraphs was skipped. I don't know. So we'll get back to that. So so I'm here to talk to you today about counterclaims, which students often find super stressful. The notes say I'm going to talk a little about logical fallacies, and I am, but the full logical fallacies was in a separate assignment. This is assignment number 11 in the fall quarter of 2020, but if you're watching this in a different quarter, please look at the materials in the classroom for which assignment this is, because I'll probably reuse this. So there you go, right? Writing and refuting counter arguments stresses students out. This is a true thing, but it's really not a hard concept. And if you make sure your thinking cap is firmly affixed to your skull cap with the tinfoil and the antenna tuned to the what is now a planet again, maybe of Pluto, or maybe it's just a large rock in space, I'm not sure. I want to try something. I want you to read through your current essay that you're working on. I want you to consider reading it out loud, because this is how you will literally hear what you need to do. If this feels super dorky, do it anyway. After each claim you make, stop and say, yeah, but, yeah, but, what about this? And yeah, okay, I get what you're saying, but what about that? These are counterclaims, rebuttals, counter arguments, oppositional arguments, whatever you want to call them. They're the disagreements. It's easy to hear them if you listen. They're spoken by that other voice in your head, the advocate for the other side. In fact, often in the Lang and Lit department, we talk about making students choose an argument in brainstorming and pre-writing, and then write the full essay that's the opposite argument, just to be able to think through the alternative arguments. Just imagine pre-writing about how opposed you are to racism and why Black Lives Matter is so important. And, it's so important to literally save the lives of African Americans in our country. And then writing the paper for the opposite, writing a paper about white supremacy, arguing that racism is a good thing. It's your personal right to be racist if you want, and that those Black men killed by the police were criminals and deserved it. The world is better without them. That's pretty hateful, isn't it? I would honestly have fun writing that paper, because it's so easy to argue it in outlandish ways like that, like I just did. But if you had to actually write the rationalization and justifications that people conjure up with sentences that start with, I am not racist, but, many cultural critics argue that no good sentences of true advocacy for equality start with sentences like, I am not racist, but. Think about it. What are those rationalizations that people make? I am not racist, but if Black people just cared about their neighborhoods, that might not be rat-infested shitholes like Baltimore. I am not racist, but Black people have to actually want to be successful to accept the help that's being provided. I am not racist, but I worked long hours to earn a 4.0 and get accepted to Stanford. I get turned down, and some Black athlete with a C average gets accepted in a football scholarship, and so on. Because these are less outlandish, but still extremely hateful and reeking of privilege and ignorance. Can you think of the counterclaims to those claims? A few federal politicians said those things about Baltimore a few years ago. Look it up. Look at the storm of angry Twitter messages that followed defending Baltimore, its neighborhoods, and the realities of why such claims could be made. Once you start thinking critically, it's easy to see all the ways to go, yeah, but have you actually been to Baltimore? Years ago, I had a student who loved to write about the American right to own guns. He didn't know much about the issue, but he thought he was pretty clever because his whole essay was based on the supposition that when someone writes something that hurts other people, you don't blame the pencil that wrote the hurtful thing. By which he meant to suggest that when someone strolls into an elementary school with his mother's AR-15 and kills 26 people, 20 of whom are children between the ages of 6 and 7, one does not blame his mother's AR-15. Really? Is that a serious argument? How many yeah buts do I get to that, right? I mean, I need a lot of them. Really, we actually don't need that many. Because if I silence the bully who wants to write mean things with his pencil, then maybe the mean things don't get written. Likewise, if Adam Lanza's mother does not own an AR-15, or if her 20-year-old son can't get his hands on it, then those children are now 13 to 14 years old as I'm making this video, very close to the 7th anniversary of the Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre, the incident that took place on December 14th of 2012. Do I need more yeah buts than that? Now, that claim about the AR-15 is just the beginning of the debate. It's very complicated. And I don't want you to get the wrong impression that I'm actually for striking down the Second Amendment. I'm not. I don't want you to get the impression that I'm against gun ownership. I'm not. I'm actually not against gun ownership of AR-15s because of the reason the Second Amendment was written and the reason that we should be able to have a citizen militia. That's why it's very complicated, despite the fact that the founding fathers had no idea about the invention of the AR-15. But everyone, despite the complication, everyone can probably agree that we don't want something that prevents such a thing, that we want to do something that prevents that thing, the Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre, from ever happening again. That's the place to position counterarguments amid the common ground, the shared value, the middle place where the opponents of the argument meet. And note how I phrase that, the opponents of the argument, as there are more than two, because any complicated issue will have more than two sides, despite the graphics I showed at the beginning of the presentation. Let's go at this issue another way. You know how to work with counterarguments because you do it all the time. Think about how you argue in your life. Think of a time that you wanted to persuade your spouse, your friend, your brother or sister, your parent, your child of something. First, you anticipated objections. Next, you plan how to beat those objections. How will you refute the resistance to your thesis, your argument? Perhaps you consider common ground. What value do you share? Let me give you an example from my life as you think on the examples from your own, okay? Often my wife and I discuss where we're to eat when we go out. Usually this is not an argument because I typically let my wife choose. Sometimes she lets me make suggestions, but I'm smart enough to only make suggestions that I know she is likely to accept. After all, the cliche of happy wife, happy life may be a cliche and even sexist, but there are nuggets of truth in things. And I have learned that arguing about where to eat is a waste of energy, and I should save that argument, save standing my ground for something that really matters. After all, my wife has very good taste. It's not like that we're going to go eat somewhere lousy if we can help it. But let's pretend that I'm actually going to try to persuade her to eat somewhere that I know she will object to just because it works great for this example, okay? And the common ground, which I haven't written in my notes, but I should mention, is that we're both starving, okay? That's the common ground. That's the shared value. We're hungry. We're very hungry. We might even be hangry. And so we want food right away. So first, I'm going to tell you that I'm going to attempt to persuade my wife to eat at the Chinese buffet. Okay, so first, I'm going to anticipate her objections. Number one, the food quality is crappy. Number 2, she hates the ambiance. Number 3, she says, I got sick the last time we ate there, didn't I? Didn't the health department shut them down for months? Are they even open? All right. Since I anticipated her objections, now I can make my arguments. This is the method that often works. Anticipate the objections and then make your arguments. Consider placing counterclaims before your own, even in the introduction, as you write about the context of your subject. There are a variety of ways to refute counterarguments. Sometimes you can pick at the evidence, showing it's incorrect or misapplied. Other times, the logic of the claims is flawed, and yet, in still more cases, you cannot dismiss or rebuke the counterclaims. You need to accept them, but show that your arguments are stronger, like this. Agreed. The food quality is pretty crappy. I know you hate the ambiance, and you did get sick after the last time we ate there, maybe caused by the food, though you also wondered if it was the flu. But you were right. The health department did shut them down for 2 months. However, they just reopened, so it's likely that the health concerns had vastly improved and the food quality may have improved as well. Let's eat there because we're starving, and our time from entering to food is shortest with a buffet compared to an order off the menu restaurant. In the buffet, we're in, we get seated, we get food. Boom. Also, we like variety. We can eat a wider variety of food at the buffet and for far less money. And here's the clincher, which will not work in all situations, or even in my situation, actually. But you chose the last 3 places we ate, so it's way past my turn to choose. This only works in a relationship in which you all take turns choosing places. We don't really do that in mine. I have no real shot to get my wife to eat at this place. None. So to some in this rhetorical situation, it seems my arguments beat her arguments, doesn't it? Quicker food, more food for less money, more variety for less money, and it's my turn. Now notice I couldn't really do anything with the ambiance. You know, the ambiance isn't going to change. I didn't need to convince her the ambiance doesn't suck or the food quality is high as the order off the menu restaurants, because neither of these things are true. The food quality isn't as good as the order off the menu restaurant, and the ambiance sucks. She doesn't like it, and I have to agree. It's not like my favorite place to go for ambiance. So I have no legitimate means to make those arguments. But how is this feeling for you? Are counter arguments becoming less stressful to make and to refute? Did that example work? I hope so. It's my favorite example. If it didn't work, I got nothing else. I might as well just end the video. No, it's not true. I got the notes. Here's a moment to pause and say, should I even give you the notes? Is that making it less motivating to actually watch the video? I hope not, because I put a lot of effort into these and I think they're good. But you have to tell me. So let's examine this whole situation with a few more situations and methods, right? So I mentioned that you could counter claims that are counter arguments with evidence. Sometimes the best way to refute a counterclaim is with evidence. For example, let's say I am arguing that white privilege exists. I actually was not prepared for this, so I have to move. I have to move something over into my space. There we go. So let's say I want to argue that white privilege exists. I've identified as my audience people who are resistant to the idea of white privilege. Those same people I mentioned earlier who often start sentences with, I am not racist, but also make claims like, I live below the poverty line, so I may be white, but I am sure not enjoying any privilege. Now, in part, this counterclaim comes from ignorance. The person does not understand the inherent nature of white privilege and why it has nothing to do with socioeconomic levels. The argument that many white people are disadvantaged because the top 1% of the world's wealth is held by a small number of almost exclusively white people is another whole rabbit hole of claims and counterclaims that we could go down, but that's a whole nother essay. So focused on race, we can simply counter the I am broke and not privileged rebuttal in 2 ways. One way is with more definition of what white privilege is. The other is with evidence, such as in this article called Explaining White Privilege to a Broke White Person by Gina Krausley-Kukorin. And this is what I wanted to show you. That's why I had to move the article, as I forgot I was doing it. So where is it? There it is. All right, it's got a cool picture, so I'm gonna have to scroll as soon as it comes up so that you can see the cool picture and also make me bigger because I'm more important. And if I make myself bigger this time, I don't have to do it again. So explaining white privilege to a broke white person. You know, it's exactly as you'd expect it. You know, the stories of poverty, which of course, you know, are things, right? And then how she read Peggy McIntosh's now famous piece, White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. It makes clear that privilege is not always measured in money and resources. It is a measure of how white people and people of color experience the world in different ways, which she writes about. Where is it? It's right in here somewhere. But then you get these examples, such as I can turn on the television or open to the front page of the paper and see people of my race widely represented. That's true of white people. It's not true of people of color. When I'm told about our national heritage or about civilization, I'm shown that people of my color made it what it is. If a traffic cop pulls me over or if the IRS audits my tax return, I can be sure I haven't been singled out because of my race. I can, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. And just this quarter, we had one African-American student who dropped. One in 3 sections out of 60 students. That's just what it is, you know, but it's important to point out. So this refutation that I just provided presents another view from the source's evidence, but it also uses logic and reasoning, leveraging the definition of white privilege to dismiss that rather weak counterclaim. It's really a straw man logical fallacy, the counterclaim. So refute with evidence, refute with logic and reasons. Now, if you look at one of the sources in the notes, the Harvard source on counterclaims, it talks about how to refute counterclaims. So when you return to your own argument, which you announce with a but or a yet or however, and nevertheless or still, must likewise involve careful reasoning, not flippant or nervous dismissal. So you can't just dismiss the counterclaim. You have to use careful reasoning to refute it. In reasoning about the proposed counter-argument, you may refute it, showing why it's mistaken, an apparent but not real problem. Acknowledge its validity or plausibility, like I did in the Chinese buffet example, but suggest why on balance it's relatively less important or less likely than what you propose, and thus doesn't overturn it. Concede its force and complicate your idea accordingly. In other words, absorb it. And restate your thesis in a more exact, qualified, or nuanced way that takes account of the objection, or start a new section which you consider your topic in light of it. This will work if the counter-argument concerns only an aspect of your argument. If it undermines your whole case, you need a new thesis. Pausing. Because sometimes in going through the counterclaim process, you discover that you can't refute the counterclaims because your thesis is not really defendable. In those cases, you might think of writing a new thesis and using the counterclaims as your arguments. Here's what rebuttal looks like in another source in the notes from Shoreline that I shared with you. And again, I don't have that source up. That was a mistake on my part. I should have probably done that. Is it this page? It is this page. So, you know, watch me on the fly. Come on. Things just don't want to work at the moment. All right, I'm going to do this because it's easier. All right. Where am I? All right, so this is what counterclaims look like. This is the shoreline source. And you scroll down, you get to the oh, wow. Okay. All right, I fixed my problem without making you watch me do it. So this is a better video for that. So I'm sorry to waste a little bit of your time searching around in the web page. I have it in my notes, but I didn't want to just show you my notes here. So this is what counter argument looks like according to the shoreline source. In his magisterial work on representation in Western literature, a foundational text in the discipline, Auerbach argues that the mixture of styles is an essential ingredient of all modern realism, a view that has found wide acceptance in the half century since its publication. Notice, however, that even this sentence is careful to attribute these views to other people and call them views. In other words, to subtly hint that they're not facts or truths. So this is, you know, when you introduce a counter argument, you have to characterize it exactly as it's written in the source that you're drawing from, or you know, whomever has said it. And you know, this is why it's often better to have sources. So then if I'm going to follow this up, while Auerbach's claim seems initially plausible and is backed by the copious evidence provided by his astonishing erudition, it is marred by inconsistency that derives from an unsupportable and ultimately incoherent definition. Now, first of all, if you don't know all of these words, I suggest that you look them up. I'm very fond of the word erudition, and copious is a good word. There's a lot of good words in here that you should be familiar with. Magisterial is pretty outside of the realm of your usual studies probably, but not a terrible word to understand. But notice how it's, you know, though his claim seems plausible or believable, is backed by evidence, and he writes about it very intelligently, is essentially what that says. It is marred by inconsistency. So there I can make arguments. There derives from unsupportable and ultimately incoherent definition. So I'm going to attack the inconsistency. I'm going to attack the definition. You know, see how that works? And so because of that, I can introduce the counter argument, and then I can do the refutation of it in my essay. So of the three sources I've provided in the notes, the Harvard one, the Shoreline one, and the Walden one, and there's going to be a few others in there as well, but those are the sources about counter arguments. They mostly argue to not overdo it with the counter arguments. Most schemes show introducing them at the end of the essay before the conclusion. Others show sharing them in the introduction, and then strengthening the thesis with an immediate rebuttal in the first body paragraph. These are fine methods. However, all rhetorical situations are different. In the case that there is more resistance to your ideas and your arguments, you may have to address counterclaims for each claim you make. For instance, I've observed that most students in my classes do not resist the argument that women earn less money than men or face gender bias in the sciences. Many agree that there are systematic discriminations against plus-size people who have to, for instance, buy 2 plane tickets in many cases when they travel. However, the majority would strongly oppose the argument that there are only 2 genders, or that racism is valid and defendable as an opinion to hold and argue, in essence, that whites are superior to everyone else. For such essays, you have to defend every claim you make because you're going to expect resistance. The majority of your audience will resist every claim you're making, and you may be unable to establish common ground. Now, in my example back in the Chinese buffet, my wife and I, our initial common ground was the fact that we were both starving. But we also have common ground in wanting kind of the same things in life, So I'm actually trying to get her to concede on ambiance, to concede on food quality, because we're starving and because we need to get food stat. So in this case, in the examples I'm building here, even if I start out such an essay with statements like, I am not racist, or I am the least racist person in this room, or I believe in equality, or I am totally against discrimination, and then I follow all that with a lot of, I am not racist, but, as I start to make a bunch of argumentative claims that I do not think are racist, but that they actually are, I am going to get a storm of opposition from my audience, whom I'm trying to persuade, and failing to do so because my position may not be defendable. As such, I'm not going to have to refute, I am going to have to refute counterclaims for every claim I make, either in the same paragraph or in sets of paragraphs that work together, kind of point counterpoint, because there's such great resistance to my thesis argument and to all of my claims. If you cannot see what these counterclaims are and what the level of resistance is, then this is why you get feedback from your instructor. I'm supposed to help point these things out to you, from your peers. They point them out. I looked over the peer review and I saw evidence of this, where they're like, hey, I see some logical fallacies in your work, which is a nice way of saying it. You should get this from your tutor. Tutors should be able to see this. And there's other people in your life that you may know that maybe I'll help you with this if you can't see it for yourself. Failing that, just search online for materials that are counter to your thesis and your claims. See how many there are. See how they're written, see what's in them. If you find a source to introduce a counterclaim, then it's even easier to refute it. Often, this is the way you get the counterclaims, is you find sources that have them. So we've introduced a variety of ways to generate counterclaims and then to deal with them to make our arguments stronger. And if we can, if we can do that, because if we can't, then we need a new thesis. But disagreement can be seen also as a hierarchy. Now, I am ready with this one, but I have to share. Yes, argument can be seen as a hierarchy. So, programmer, writer, and investor, with a PhD from Cornell, Paul Graham, made this handy infographic for how to disagree. Essentially, how some counter arguments will be generated by your audience. As you can see, the lowest forms are name calling and the fancier ad hominem, which is the name for the logical fallacy, which is basically the same thing. Jerk. Or of course he would say that he's a senator, attack, personal attack. Next level up, the disagreement targets the writing and not the writer. So this is a little better, but not perfectly great because it's focusing on the tone. It's missing the core content of the arguments. I can't believe the author dismisses intelligent design in such a cavalier fashion. He's so cavalier about it. Another good word, if you want to look it up. And you don't know it already. So it's slightly improved. We can get a little better with the next level, which you see is contradiction, stating the opposing case, but with no evidence. I can't believe the author dismisses intelligent design in such a cavalier fashion. Intelligent design is a legitimate scientific theory. No evidence for that. Finally, in the top 3 levels, we see disagreement that's meaningful. Simple counter-argument features 2 people arguing their positions, but making no headway against the other person's position. If I state my case and you state your case, and then I state my case again, and then you state yours again, we both have evidence, and maybe we have new evidence each time, but if we never deal with what the other person says, then that's not a debate. It's just a speech, it's just speech making with no thinking and no arguing. We must refute. So the first level of refutation means dealing with the things the other person is saying directly and looking for a smoking gun, that obvious mistaken thing, even though this may be a straw man argument. Top level refutation means dealing with the central point of the other argument, really understanding it. The author's main point seems to be X, and and then you quote it. But this is wrong for the following reasons, and then you go through them. That's really what you should do. And now we can see a counterclaim really being refuted in such a setup, in that kind of structure. The author's main point is this, and you share what it is, but this is wrong for the following reasons. Okay, so where are we at? Thinking critically about sources is a way to generate counterclaims. And sometimes as I do this, I see things missing in my notes. So we have to be vigilant. That's why this video is episode 3 and the final episode of Investigators of the Truth. We have to get our doubt barometer working, our skepticism, our bullshit detector, and really think critically about our sources and our own arguments as well. So there's this source, The Invention of Systemic Racism, that in fall of 2020 I shared in the classroom, and that I may keep sharing because I really like the way it teaches some of the things that I want to focus on. So let me show it to you. All right. All right, so The Invention of Systemic Racism by Philip Carl Salzman, and published in August of 2020. So as I start to read this, right away, my barometer for doubt and skepticism should be pegging off the chart because of the title alone. Systemic racism is not invented. It's just an effect of racism that's embedded in culture because people are racist. And so there are racist systems, or the racism comes out in the systems. To claim it was invented is to claim that racism does not exist, or at least that's what the claim seems to be to me. I could continue to qualify that argument. And yet I can easily prove that false. I can easily prove that racism exists. I think that is a commonly held belief that is easy enough to prove. All I have to do is start reading the article, and immediately I think of my yeah buts. So let's just start with this very first line. Let's just look at the very first line of this right here. If you can see it, maybe I should make this a little bigger. And just look at this first line. Okay. It is now the official view in government, industry, and education that African Americans and certain other people of color perform poorly in schools and the workforce, but nonetheless must be treated as if they perform well, he writes. First of all, since when is that an official view at any level? He says it's the official view. Since when? Next, show me the numbers, which he does later in the article, but I'm not going to deal with it. I'm not doing a full refutation of this, but I would refute the numbers and I would refute what he says about them. Who says they must be treated as if they did well? But set that aside. What does it mean to perform well? What does it mean to not perform well? And why the actual does he have people of color in quotes? Well, this article may be written by a PhD, but it's already a hateful, biased piece of reactionary exposition that is suspect, offensive, and possibly dangerous. And sure, I'm breaking my own rules about being ethical and trustworthy. Sorry, I'm human. But this writing pisses me off. But I quoted what he said, and then I trotted out questions to start my reasoned arguments against just that sentence. Just that, that's what he says. Let's start to break it down. Let's start to pick at it. Let's start to open holes in it. And then I would bring in evidence. Likewise, at the end of that paragraph, he says something else that's just wonderful. The alleged facts supporting the historical claims of the 1619 project have been proven false by historians, he writes. And he has a link to false, for which if we open it up, and I guess I might as well here. No, that's gonna go straight. Well, that's okay. I can, yeah. So this. The fight over the 1619 project is not about the facts. A dispute between a small group of scholars and the authors, New York Times Magazine's issue on slavery represents fundamental disagreement over the trajectory of American society. Right in the title. It's not proven false. It's being debated. There's a disagreement about the trajectory of American society. Not proven false. No, that's completely wrong. So it's not the same. So now this guy has zero credibility because he cannot even read a title. And yeah, that what I just did, that's ad hominem. Fine. Come at me, bro. Come at me. Flush. That's how I feel. But that's just the first paragraph. I haven't even reached gems like the evidence-free systemic racism. Let me actually show this to you. If I can find it. Oh, and it's still loading. That's great. Come on. I wonder if that'll just get me to it. Except that, yeah, right here. The evidence-free systemic racism is proven in the minds of radical professors and race activists by the poor performance of African Americans, by the underrepresentation of African Americans in choice professions, jobs, and wealth, and by the overrepresentation of African Americans in the prison system. Yep. I could do a lot with that. Or I could go to this next one that's even cooler. Not that one. Not that one. Yeah, this one. Recognizing the weakness of slavery as an explanatory factor, radical sociologists invented systemic racism, which is alleged to be societal bigotry and discrimination in the absence of bigotry and discrimination by actual individuals. Really? Recognizing the weakness of slavery as an explanatory factor. Radical sociologists, right away, we're seeing hot button words here that I think dismiss him, but we're not supposed to dismiss people who work with their arguments. Invented systemic racism, which is alleged to be societal bigotry and discrimination in the absence of bigotry and discrimination by actual individuals. Is he really arguing that there is no discrimination and bigotry by actual individuals in our society? So, oh joy, happy, happy, joy, joy. I could just go to town on this. If only this was my essay that I was writing, I would use this. I would write my essay to tear down this racist invective and his unfounded vitriol. I could structure my whole essay on arguing for why systemic racism is a major problem and how white people need to stop resisting the problems they're complicit in, to which they consent with inaction, and do something about these problems. And that's why I'm teaching these subjects. That's why the language and lit department here just wrote a statement of intent to address these subjects in the classroom, because Lower Columbia College has a 5-year plan and mission statement goals for the whole college for diversity and equity education. But I don't want to do all that refutation in this video, but I may on my blog, because refuting arguments that make me angry is fun. At least it's fun for me. So what did you learn? Do we understand counterclaims better and find them less stressful? If not, examine the sources in the notes and find your own. There's plenty out there, as this concept is taught at virtually every school. All you need to do is Google counter arguments or counterclaims, or so on, all the words. This process in which we have been engaged builds critical thinking skills and a commitment to lifelong learning that is, well, lifelong, I hope. So get busy, be an investigator of the truth. Thank you for listening.